Hey everyone, Warwick's here. Today's video is not going to be maybe as optimistic as I normally would like them to be, but I think it's time that I have to do this video, one that I've been thinking about for a while, and that's basically talking about Guardian Druid going into Dragonflight and how the spec is on the verge of being basically dead if Blizzard doesn't make any changes soon. Now, I'm recording and releasing this on October 3rd. This is before the next beta build is coming out. I'm hoping that some of this stuff is already going to be looked at and it's going to be, reviewed over. I am a bear lover. I love playing Guardian Druid. I've had more fun with it this past season than I have Brewmaster, even though Brewmaster is clearly the stronger tank. And I'm going to be maining Druid for Dragonflight. So Guardian Druid is going to be a class that I'm going to be, or a spec rather, that I'm going to be playing a lot of because I tank Mythic Plus for a lot of members of my community and for my little miniature push team that we've got going. So I'm not really going to hit too much on the class tree because I think the problems with that tree have been pretty far well and wide known. It's the only tree that's basically been completely untouched since it was first released. The 3-point nodes in Killer Instinct, in Nurturing Instinct, Lakara's Teachings, all of those we know are going to at the very minimum be reduced to 2 points because Blizzard does not want 3-point nodes in the tree anymore, which frees up 3 extra points, which if you could get 3 extra points going down, it kind of depends on what build you're looking at, but I could very well see you kind of pushing down into something like Protector of the Pack, which is the old Fura talent. Protector of the Pack, basically you store 10% of your damage up to X%, and your next regrowth consumes all stored damage to increase its healing. This talent for Guardian Druid is going to be pretty shit because you can't cast regrowth in bear form. It's the only spec that can't cast it in its form. Of course, Restoration's in caster form, so they have no problems with it. Moonkins can cast it in Moonkin form. Ferals cast it through Predatory Swiftness. Guardian cannot do it. So unless they change regrowth to be castable in bear form, I don't see this talent being good at all for Guardian. Now, would regrowth being castable in bear form be good for the spec? Maybe. I haven't quite figured that one out, mainly because Frenzied Regen does like a better version of regrowth. It's just that you need to be able to do it for for no rage. So like there's a possibility it could be good, but I just don't see it. So this talent, unfortunately, good for 3 specs. Even then, it's questionable how good it is. And it's completely garbage for Guardian Druid, which is a running theme with a lot of the changes that have been happening with Druid lately, is that a lot of the changes have been good. All 3 other specs have gotten good changes, and Guardian has just been left out in the tree. The other thing that I did, let me see if I can grab it real quick, is I did make a post on the beta forums, and that's going to basically touch on a lot of what I am doing here. So let me yank Discord up real quick because that's the fastest way for me to get to the post. So I'll kind of be using it a little bit as a script here, guys, so apologies if you see me looking this way that I am now, because my second monitor is basically directly to my left because of my space limitations I've got going on here. Alright, there we go. So this is the post I'll show you real quick. So it's here on the beta forums, or it's in the in development side of things on Wowhead. So it is there, and we're going to kind of talk about it, and I'm going to use the tree itself as restrictive. I did a lot of feedback on the tree, but I also did some things that I think impact bear holistically. So let's talk about that. And first off, we're going to talk about how the tree itself is very restrictive. So right now, these are kind of the talents most everyone is seeing as mandatory. Sorry, I thought that was my phone. So these talents are basically all seen as mandatory, which means you're not getting your second charge of Survival Instincts, you're not getting Ursoc's Endurance, Infected Wounds. Alright. And then, depending on your build type, there are some other stuff that are being seen here. Now, the only talents on this row that most people are seeing as quote unquote mandatory are these three. Because secretly, I think everyone loves the Galactic Guardian build. I absolutely adore Galactic Guardian, and the power being put into Moonfire, it definitely makes the spec much more active to play outside of just spamming Thrash. And so I personally love and appreciate that this type of build back is back. But here's the thing. This tree overall is too restrictive, because everything else here in the middle either is not very good, like layered mane and reinforced fur, or needs severe tuning in Tooth and Claw, and I'd say Vicious Cycle into Vulnerable Flesh this side. Positive Outlook or Flashing Claws, Positive Outlook, whatever you call it, into Earth Warden is also one that a lot of people see with Thrash triggering the Thrash build. I think you only take this talent in Mythic Plus, which means that basically for the raid build, you have to take Tooth and Claw into Vulnerable Flesh in order to open up this side of the tree, which of course you got to take all the Berserk talents. This is another problem that I have with the tree, is that you are build a Berserk. Now the Feral tree also does this. Let's duplicate this tab real quick. Like the Feral tree does this as well, but it does it, I think, in a way that is much more clean, and that it makes these talents feel very mandatory as you go down the tree. So like just a quick sample build here. I'm not gonna grab that. Grab this, grab this. Like, of course you grab Berserk here, and then you take something like Rampant Ferocity, Tear Open Wounds, Dreadful Bleeding, and then like your natural pathing down the tree grabs these other two talents. You know, and the talents that you are making optional on the side of the tree actually are things like these two nodes out here, which have some very good talents in them. But like the Berserk cooldowns feel much more fluid, whereas here they feel restrictive because, like, yes, you have to connect to them, but it's everything above them that feels bad. So like this middle part of the tree is just really poor. And then also once you come to this section, you're committing to a capstone. Potentially. Like I've seen builds where, you know, you kind of go like this and then grab, you know, Guardian of Ursoc into Ursoc's Guidance, and then you maybe come down and grab this. There are people that don't take Ursoc's Fury and then like Rend and Tear. Like I've seen those types of builds. I'm not a fan of Incarn on Guardian, because just 30 seconds of spamming Thrash just is not fun and engaging gameplay. It's definitely powerful, but it's just not fun. I would love to see Incarnation be switched up. You add the 30% health to Berserk, and you make Incarnation something more interesting than a 30 seconds of, you know, Thrash spam. So for me, like, I don't go to this build, but then in order to get all the talents that I want, I have to sacrifice some stuff in the middle. Whereas if I could just path this way or go straight down like this, like in a single target build. Also, Reinvigoration just doesn't belong here. I'd like to, and same with Survival Instincts, I'd like to see these choice nodes moved up just below these Berserk talents, because I think that makes them better, and then just allow them to connect straight down. I think even doing something simple like that really opens up the build. The other thing is there's too many hanging talents. So Infected Wounds, Ursoc's Endurance, Galactic Guardian, Vicious Cycle should all connect to the talents directly below them, because I think that opens up some build diversity for those that want it. So you can go like a really ISI, which to me this talent should just be removed, and you should be able to just, when you talent Survival Instincts, you get the 2 charges, because that's what makes it distinct from Feral. So I think Gore and Infected Wounds, Survival Instincts, and Ursoc's Endurance should connect down here, so you have some options in that section of the tree. And then you also connect all these quote-unquote hanging talents, as I call them, that just don't connect to anything. Like even these can connect straight down, and it opens up a ton of pathing. You can connect Twin Moonfire down here to After the Wildfire, or Earth Warden into this choice node, or what I think should be Reinvigoration and Survival Instincts itself. Just opening up a lot more pathing options, I think, really spreads the tree out a lot more and allows for much more interesting build diversity dependent on what you want to achieve. All right, the other thing is this choice node, Blood Frenzy in particular, is I think way too low in the tree. You've already heard my suggestion, move it up literally one choice node, switch it with Survival of the Fittest, and go from there. But I would also maybe like to see it moved somewhere in here as well. Maybe it gets switched with Vulnerable Flesh, which I think Vicious Cycle and Vulnerable Flesh should be switched up, but more on that in just a second. But moving Blood Frenzy somewhere up into the tree, maybe switch it with this Bristling Fur Brambles node. I think I would really like that personally, just because Blood Frenzy and Soul of the Forest, frankly, are so massive for rage generation for the spec that I think that it absolutely needs to be moved further up to the tree, and it being on a row 9 just feels really bad. So I think switching it with this choice node of Bristling Fur and Brambles, which are decent talents, but not anything that I feel like is like the first, like these first 3 rows should be everything that makes your spec feel like are all the things that Blizzard wants you to have as quote unquote mandatory. Again, comparing to the Feral Tree, like you're grabbing almost everything they want in this first row. So you're getting Tiger's Fury, you get Omen of Clarity, you get Primal Wrath, you get a better Rake, you get a better stealth ability, you get Predator, you get Merciless Strikes. Like these are the things that kind of fill out the core kit. Again, to make a comparison, I'm going to duplicate the tab, and we're on the right one. Let's go to, for example, let's go to Unholy Death Knight. Unholy Death Knight in their first 5 talent points get everything that's core to their spec. Guardian does not, because that's the druid. Because Blood Frenzy and Soul of the Forest, which I think are very important and are identity breaking or identity making talents for Guardian, all right, row 9. Just the disconnect between that and almost every other DPS/tank spec in the game, I think is really poor. There's a lot of dead talents in this tree. There are many talents that I see that I've been looking at, different bear creators, whether it's Tactics or Shaw or others that are doing bear builds. Nobody's taking Infected Wounds. Nobody's taking Ursoc's Endurance. Very few, if any, people are taking ISI. And we all hate taking something like Reinvigoration or Survival of the Fittest. Like, I think that these are talents that are just not very good. We're also seeing, like, After the Wildfire and Guardian of a Loon, nobody's really taking it. Pulverize has been taken in a lot of builds. I just think that these are talents that need to be rethought or removed. And by doing so, and for certain ones like Infected Wounds, Ursoc's Endurance, ISI, these 3 talents in particular, to me, there's no tuning that you can do that makes them good. That's just my opinion on it. So just removing them, like I said, ISI should be baked into Survival Instinct's baseline. I think that is something that really functions well. Reconnect all the Moonfire talents. So in the original tree, which I wish I had a screenshot of, but like basically right around here, there was like 4 straight talents, and then they offshoot down here to Incarn/Guardian that were literally all 5 of these talents. Literally all 5 of those talents. And what was really cool about it is that it put in very distinct gameplay. Right now, with Fury of Nature being 100% required to get down to Incarn or Convoke, and then you also have Elun's Favored and Circle of Life and Death, all of these talents are encouraging Moonfire. To me, that means that Blizzard sees Moonfire as a very core part of the build. They see it as a core part of the gameplay, yet all the talents that enhance Moonfire are way off in this fucking corner. I would like to see them take these 3 talents and swap them with these 3 talents, and then connect Galactic Guardian down to Fury of Nature. And then what happens is that if you want a more offensive build, you can run something like Tooth and Claw, Vulnerable Flesh, or in Mythic Plus, what happens is that you can grab Flashing Claws over Tooth and Claw, and then you just need to buff these to where if someone really wants to play very defensively and skip the Moonfire talents as a result, they have that sort of flexibility to do so. Because right now these talents feel very weak. Layered Mane, if you gave it the old Azurite trait treatment of giving it agility, I think that makes it a significantly better talent choice and a real choice between taking Layered Mane and Reinforced Fur versus Scintillating Moonlight and Twin Moonfire. The other thing that I would like to see is Guardian of Elune replace Reinforced Fur. Guardian of Elune, I've used it in Torghast. It's a Torghast power right now. I actually don't think it's bad, and I actually think it does. It has, like, it's very simple, but it's very good. Longer Iron Furs mean better uptime on your mitigation, whereas here it just increases the armor and then an extra bark skin DR. I'd like to switch these two talents so that Guardian of Elune, I think, works better with this fundamentally. And then you have this way of going, all right, here's a mega defensive build. Of course, you move front of the pack over here as well. Now you have a mega defensive build where you maybe go like Layered Mane, Guardian of Elune into like your Moonfire talents, where you're just focusing on staying alive, Moonfire giving you some rage through Galactic Guardian, and then you're getting the healing through Elune's Favored. Like, that's a very defensive build, but then you can also go a very offensive build by talenting the Moonfire talents. In Mythic Plus, you go get Flashing Claws and Earth Warden to give you the extra thrash damage, and then you come down through like Ursoc's Fury, Random Tear, that sort of stuff. Like, I think that all of those open up some really nice pathing and build variety options without kind of making the specs, like, fundamental tree setup feel any different. I think it's just feels natural to have all these talents connected because it kind of defines to both veteran players like myself. I say veteran, but I mean, I've played Bear a lot in BFA, played it quite a bit in Season 4, but, you know, you think of long time, and, you know, think of any Bear player that you know that plays Bear or loves Bear, plays it a long time. For them, they now know, okay, Moonfire is now a defining part of this tree, and there's actually interactions inside the tree that make Moonfire feel very valuable to use. For new players, if they're like, hey, I want to try tanking and I want to try Guardian Druid, they now can look at this tree and say, oh, Moonfire is really important. And I think that just allows for the spec to have a much better focus in terms of what it does offensively. And then, of course, Iron Fur / Maul being your defensive toolkit. The other talent that I want to see something done with is Vulnerable Flesh. Just a 30% chance to crit is very boring. It's kind of RNG because crit isn't a very valuable stat for Guardian Druid in the first place. So, and it's legitimately just a single target talent that you will never notice. It does not add to gameplay for a spec that lacks gameplay. I think this is just really, really poorly placed, and making it required to get down to this side of the tree if you're doing like a single target buildup, I think is really bad. I think you should switch it with Vicious Cycle that allows this talent here to go, maybe do 7.5 and 15, or you can do like 10, 20 if you want to buff it a little bit, and then make this just a 1 point flat 30% chance to crit. What I think this does is that if someone wants to lean into the Maul build, they are getting, you know, a very controllable, okay, this is proc based, but like they're getting a controllable boost to their Maul where they can get extra damage on Maul when they get a Tooth and Claw proc, and they can also take a point and sink it into Vulnerable Flesh to really go high single target damage. Or what it does is, if you're like me and you don't really like this talent, it allows it to switch it up where I get something that's very controlled damage, and then it allows me to continue on down and ignore Vulnerable Flesh, where I'm looking at more of a hybrid defensive offensive build for maybe Mythic Plus or for Tyrannical Weeks or something like that. But I think this talent and Vicious Cycle need to switch and need to be adjusted accordingly. Maybe this is only 15% chance to crit. Either way, I think that this talent does not need to be as required as it is for most single target builds. All right, and then let's look at the Mythic Plus build. So let me just redo this. So the Mythic Plus build that most people are looking at least is my understanding, is they're going, of course, these talents, and then they grab these, but then you're forced to take Layered Mane into Reinforced Fur. Like, you have to take 2 points somewhere. So a lot of people are just taking layered main, and then they're coming like this side where you grab this. The problem is that this talent feels really poor to take, and these talents take very poor to take. So you're bloating the build. And if you want to get something like Rend and Tear, which I think is very good, you know, you're talking 60% extra damage, or 6% extra damage, and 6% less damage done to you. That's pretty solid. Untamed Savagery is bad, in my opinion. I would love to see it baked into Flashing Claws. But then you have to take these 2 points that are very bad in Invigoration. You take Ursoc's Fury because Absorb Shield. And then you grab Rend and Tear, and you literally cannot go down and get the rest of the Moonfire connecting talents because of these 3 points right here. So this build is just very bloated compared to a more raid-oriented build, which looks, generally speaking, something like this. You grab Bristling Fur for the on-demand rage gen. Most people are doing something like this. And then if you want to go grab Soul of the Forest, Rage of the Sleeper. A lot of people are also doing Ursoc's Fury for this to grab Rend and Tear. But then I can also get Elun's Favored, and then you can grab Incarn with your last point, or you can also grab Circle of Life and Death, depending on what you want to do. A lot of people I see are just going Incarn. So you see a build like this, which just feels much more exciting to play, Vulnerable Flesh aside. Like, the bloat that's developed into the build because of where these talents are misplaced, these 3 talents I think are misplaced, I think really hurts the spec for a Mythic Plus build. So that's kind of what I have with the tree. A lot of it's just a pathing issue. There's some talents that I still feel like are out of place. There's some talents that feel very weak. And there's talents that I think are just dead and need to be rethought completely or removed. What are the good things about this tree? I love Rage of the Sleeper being back in. I do want to talk positives about the tree. Rage of the Sleeper feels really good. I quite enjoy having it. It gives, instead of making Guardian Druid a pure 3-minute class, which is what a lot of the gameplay is with Incarn and Ravenous Frenzy right now, you're basically a 1.5-minute class because you're getting 25% damage here on a 1.5-minute cooldown. So you're a god every 3 minutes, but you're still pretty good every 1.5 minutes. I really like that. I do like the Tooth and Claws now. That talent that you can grab for single target purposes. I love the Moonfire talents and the interplay with Moonfire coming back in. The Galactic Guardian playstyle, which is prevalent in BFA, was always one of my favorite playstyles. It's fallen out of favor here with the introduction of the tier set and Incarn being as strong as they are. It just kind of makes the spec feel very one note. Going back to now having Moonfire be a very important part of not only your rage generation through Galactic Guardian, your damage kit through also defensively with Scintillating Moonlight 4% on our targets that have it. You can spread it much quicker and it does more damage, which then in turn favors with Fury of Nature. So Twin Moonfire, Fury of Nature, combined Galactic Guardian, Scintillating Moonlight, and Elun's Favored, which combines with all 4 of these talents. Like, I love the Moonfire interplay. I just want to see these all connected again so the gameplay feels much more focused, or the tree feels much more focused. Honestly, those are my 2 biggest things about it. I love this setup here with Ursoc's Fury having Maul added to it. Makes it a valuable talent in single target. Rend and Tear still, of course, always like. So there's some very good things going on in this tree. It's just the poor things about this tree outweigh the good things. Just a real quick touch on the class tree. Obviously these 3 talent point nodes need to be rejected, make regrowth castable in bear form, and I think that helps the specs sustain a ton, because now because we lost Ysera's gift, now we're getting, maybe after you spend X amount of rage, you get a free regrowth or something like that. That can be something that's done, say with like Ursine Adept. So you do this, all damage in bear form taken by 10%. After spending 100 rage, your next regrowth is free. Something like that, I think would be really nice, and all of a sudden makes Fura a potential in a world like in Mythic Plus, where you don't grab Innervate, you don't grab Nature's Vigil, but you're grabbing Incap Roar, because hopefully there's mana regen talents in Nature's Vigil. People can't decide if they like it or hate it. I also think Heart of the Wild probably needs to be rethought a little bit, because it just feels really awkward to play as Guardian Druid, and really honestly as feral and balanced the little bit of time that I played it. Resto, it feels a little bit better because you are kitty weaving in Mythic Plus, owl weaving a little bit more in raid, so like Rest of it feels fine. Like, I'm almost to the point where I'm skipping this and just taking minute roar because I love me some minute roar. So there's a lot of things that can go on. Finally, let's kind of talk about the spec as on a more holistic level, a wider view. This is not something that can be fixed now with 2 months to go on Dragonflight. I mean, maybe there's some tweaks that they can do to it, but they're focused on bug fixing and tuning. I'm not sure that we're going to be able to see these types of changes, which I think are going to have to happen either on a past scale or even going into a new expansion scale. Things that I think that should have been considered that weren't. One, lack of complexity. I kind of mentioned this already. I'm going to go into more detail with it now. I think it's been stated even on record by Blizzard developers that they see Guardian Druid as quote unquote the beginner's tank. Someone that's brand new to tanking, they want them to gravitate towards Guardian Druid. I respect this idea. I don't agree with it because I think there are 2 or 3 other tanks that you can easily just pick up, especially what you're basically telling someone that's playing like Ret Paladin that, hey, if you want to tank, don't tank within your own spec, go to Guardian Druid. Like, level a completely new character and gear up a completely new character. So calling Guardian a quote unquote beginner's tank, I think, while I understand the thought process behind it, I'm going to respectfully disagree that it should be considered that and viewed that way. Because outside of maybe Blood DK, I think most of the other tanks have really straightforward, understandable gameplay that all have a skill ceiling to them that allows really good players of those specs to maximize the tank in ways that newer folks or beginners or medium skilled players even will not. You know, obviously Blood DK, one of the more skill intensive tanks, quote unquote skill intensive, where, you know, managing death strike, managing your cooldowns and things like that are going to be very, very important. Prop Paladin, managing your health bar and your cooldowns outside of Shield of the Righteous uptime, with that kind of being the choice gameplay, I think is something that has that, like, that skill gap that I think is needed to be there. Brewmaster Monk, it's about, you know, how can you invoke Dejao effectively with kind of degenning, purifying, and just purifying and when to purify, how to maximize what you purify, things of that nature. I think are also going to be kind of are what creates that skill gap between a beginner brewmaster and an expert brewmaster. Prot Warrior, shield block up time. You know, how do you balance your rage generation in order to maintain your defensive abilities like shield block, ignore pain, versus going offensive with like revenge? I think that, and knowing like when it's okay, when you're okay to do that as a Prot Warrior, I think is what separates great Prot Warriors from regular Prot Warriors. And then of course a Vengeance Demon Hunter, they have their Demon Spikes uptime. I know that's gotten a little bit of a soft rework to make it a little bit less bad feeling, and a little bit more user friendly, which I agree with. But you know, they have their Demon Spikes uptime. You know, how effective can you use things like the sigils? How effectively can you heal up with your soul shards? You know, similar to how Death Strike works and functions. Like Vengeance Demon Hunter is, I think, one of the higher skill cap class, because a really great Vengeance Demon Hunter is very different and noticeable from a regular Demon Hunter. So like, I just went over all 5 other tanks, and I think in all cases, seeing a really good Brewmaster or really good Prot Paladin, Warrior, DK, whatever the case may be, seeing a good version of all the other tanks versus a new version of all the other tanks versus a great version of all the other tanks. Like, there's very distinctive ways to tell who's been playing a spec for a while and really knows things about it versus those that are still learning and still growing. We say this about other classes too, like a good Fire Mage versus a beginning Fire Mage is really noticeable. A good Disc Priest versus a veteran Disc Priest, a really good one, or a beginner Disc Priest versus a veteran Disc Priest or a great Disc Priest player is very noticeable. Guardian Druid doesn't have that. It's one of the only specs outside of maybe Beast Mastery Hunter, and even Beast Mastery Hunter, this upcoming expansion in Dragonflight is getting things that are going to be able to separate good BM hunters from bad BM hunters. Guardian Druid is basically a tank that a really good tank player and a really bad tank player, it's really hard to tell the difference between a bad Guardian or even a new Guardian Druid versus a very good Guardian Druid. And to me, I think that's an area where things like managing your vicious cycle, or managing your Moonfire spread. Like, there are some things that could potentially be there, but I think there needs to be something else done to add a level of complexity that doesn't take away from the simple gameplay, but gives these veteran bear players, or someone like me that loves the spec and wants to play it a lot, gives us something to continue to achieve and strive for inside of a dungeon. Like, yes, we're gonna have to learn about pathing and all this other stuff, and staying, you know, when events come up in raid and stuff like that. But once there's gonna be a certain point where we're very comfortable, we're farming a lot of this stuff, and what keeps the spec interesting, instead of just kind of like spamming thrash for 90 seconds out of every 5 minutes or whatever the case may be. You know, there's a layer and a level of complexity built within the kit that, you know, doesn't make it necessarily required that you have to do, because all these other specs have that too. But if you can maximize this aspect of the kit, you're going to do that much better, and it gives you something to strive for as a player as well. And right now, Guardian doesn't have that. You know, whether it's more interactions with the kit, more synergies with the kit. Like right now, you have Mangle as damage increase for Thrash being on the target. Obviously, these Moonfire talents are going to add a little bit more to the spec as a whole, making Moonfire uptime a little bit more. I think Vicious Cycle has the potential to be that little added complexity. When do you maul? When do you mangle? Or, you know, when do you maul to maximize your damage on, or to maximize the damage increase? You know, it's talking 45% extra damage. Versus, do you hold off on mangle, or do you just take advantage of a flat 15% increase? Like, there's little intricacies that are happening with this that I think make the potential for it to be there, and this talent just feels so optional, as I've already talked about. But there are other things that you can do, things like Gory Fur. Like, you kind of just don't notice, like maximizing Iron Fur, which we're going to talk about a little bit here in just a minute. But like maximizing Iron Furs, like there's not really a thought process to it. So just do something that makes it so that new players have a thing that they can strive towards playing once they learn the very core foundations of the spec. That also gives veteran players something that can make them stand out as, like, to a group that's like, hey, we're gonna bring a bear in. Oh wow, this guy is doing this type of stuff. That's really freaking cool. You know, so just something like that I think would be really nice. All right, and let's talk about, to me, the biggest elephant in the room from the spec holistically, and that is Maul and Iron Fur. Both of your spenders are boring. Like, Iron Fur just takes you from being hit hard to hit not as hard. It doesn't do anything else. Doesn't do damage. Doesn't give you an absorb. It doesn't have any interactions with anything else. Like, while Iron Fur is active, XYZ does better things. You know, it's just bland, it's boring, and it's a maintenance buff in an era where maintenance buffs don't feel good. Alright. So I'd like to see, the problem with Iron Fur is that I don't have a ton of great ideas. If you have suggestions for how to make Iron Fur better, please drop them in the comments. I would love to hear them and get some conversation around it going, just because I don't really have any ideas for how to make Iron Fur better. I just know right now, as a bear lover, I am not enthused about having to spam Iron Fur all the time and just maintain as many stacks of it as I possibly can. It just doesn't feel good. It makes the active mitigation feel very RNG, which is something that I don't think any other tank spec goes. I know Brewmaster for sure doesn't, because that's the spec that I'm most experienced with otherwise. Like, Brewmaster always has Shuffle Up, you know, which is a base, which is kind of like the same thing as Iron Fur, and that it just makes your stagger better, and you take some reduced damage while stagger's going. Actually, let's look. Give me this. Let's go, because Shuffle is in the tree here. Yeah, so it increases the effectiveness of your stagger, and you always have it up because you're doing this. So you're getting 100% bonus on your stagger. So, like, this is a passive buff, basically a passive active mitigation that is just always up from doing your kit. Whereas for Guardian Druid, you have to actively maintain your passive buff, because that's essentially what Iron Fur is. So we need to do something with Iron Fur to make it feel more engaging to press as a defensive mitigation tool. And Maul. Maul has been one of the worst abilities in the game for a long time. And I think it's time to change that. It's whatever to push in single target. It doesn't do great damage. I think the percentage of attack power needs to be significantly buffed for it to feel good. And I think there needs to be something that allows you to push it in AoE situations. Because basically, once a second target is introduced, you might as well take Maul off your bars. I know many a Guardian Druid that don't even have Maul on the bar. When they're not tanking, they would just rather sit and overcap Rage so that they have Iron Furs ready to go for when they are actively tanking in Raid. And in Mythic Plus, there's no reason to use Maul ever. Now, I think there's been steps taken to make Maul feel a little bit more impactful through Tooth and Claw, Vicious Cycle, Vulnerable Flesh, unfortunately. But like even Ursox Fury. But like beyond that, we need Maul to do something more, do something better, and make it feel better to push. Because right now you're just better off spending the 40 rage in almost all situations on an Iron Fur, which to me doesn't feel great. Like, warriors have Revenge, Shield Block, and Ignore Pain that they can spend rage on, and each are very useful in different situations. Right now, Guardian Druid doesn't have that. So making Maul cleave, I think, would be really good, whether that's done through one of the Berserk cooldowns, make it through Soul of the Forest, even Rage of the Sleeper, I think would be good ways to do that, where Maul hits like 3 targets. All of a sudden, Maul might be useful in small pack situations or towards the end of pulls where your damage intake is not much, but you still want to make sure you're spending Rage. And all of a sudden, that makes Tooth and Claw potentially good in or in AoE. You know, obviously that adds to the talent bloat for Mythic Plus builds we've already talked about, but you know, if you have a spare point somewhere else in the tree, all of a sudden Tooth and Claw becomes an attractive option for that. So I would like to see them either add another like thing that you could spend your rage on, like an AoE rage spender, and make Maul valuable as your single target rage spender when you don't need to Iron Fur, or make it so that Maul is useful in AoE by either cleaving to 3 targets or up to 5 targets, you know, with cooldowns or whatever, just so that it has value outside of just being a straight rage dump that you feel bad pressing, because it doesn't do much beyond that. So that's kind of like what I want to see for the spec as a whole, and go from there. But that's my thoughts on Guardian Druid. I'm going to post this on a Monday where I feel like the, you know, hopefully all this becomes irrelevant within the next few days. But if not, it's up here for the history books. So I'm going to end it here, guys. Thank you for sticking around if you've been here this 38 minutes, my rant on Guardian Druid. Until the next time, I hope you all stay safe. I hope you have fun. You keep on gaming. And I'll see you next time.